The year is 1315 and you are a medieval peasant. You have survived the pestilence that has cut down so many around you, but now winter is coming and so is hunger. All around you, others are succumbing to starvation. What is a year like for you? How does it compare to the year of plague? In what ways is this year more normal? In this series, we bring history alive by putting you in the middle of it. Let's spend a whole year in medieval Europe to see what everyday life was like. It's me. Welcome to this house. Today, we are going back to 1315 in France. The Black Death has recently killed off about a third of the people around here. And now there is another crisis. Famine. Your lord and his family have packed up and gone somewhere else for the winter. They'll be back in the spring when the crops hopefully grow better and you and your fellow villagers are on your own. It's September and the harvest was bad this year. It wasn't helped by the plague either, which killed experienced farmers and left others too sick to work the fields properly. Now, stores of grain are running out and the price of bread has risen dramatically. What can you do? Your life depended on farming and tending animals. Hey everyone, welcome back to Life Noggin. Today we re-answering a question from Thomas and many other subscribers who want to know, what did medieval peasants eat? This question has so many layers to it. But before we get into all of those layers, let's be honest, the medieval diet sounds pretty gross by our standards. Think moldy bread, roadkill, and offal. But do be so quick to judge because scholars are learning that the medieval diet was unnecessarily unhealthy? In fact, if we set aside the vagaries of famine, the medieval diet was surprisingly diverse. Medieval peasants ate fruit and vegetables, dairy and meat, beer and bread. They ate a wide variety of dishes made from ingredients available in their region. So today we're going to dive into what the medieval peasant ate. Just a warning though, we'll be diving into some pretty disgusting stuff, including animal parts that would make any modern person shudder. So viewer discretion is advised. The medieval period lasted for 1,000 years, from around 476 CE to 1450 CE, and it took place across 3 continents. So obviously, the foods available to medieval peasants varied depending on where they lived. However, most medieval peasants were agricultural laborers who worked on someone else's land, and their diet was generally based on the crops that were grown on that land. As you might expect, this meant that most medieval peasants ate primarily grains like wheat, oats, barley, and rye. Grains were milled into flour, baked into bread, and boiled into porridges. This porridge was made by boiling grains in water and was served warm for breakfast or supper. The quality of the bread and the porridge depended on the quality of the flour, which depended on the harvest. In good years, the bread was lighter and sweeter, while in lean years it was heavier and more dense. However, bread wasn't the only thing made from flour. Medieval peasants also ate a type of flatbread called a trench, which was made by rolling out dough and cooking it in a frying pan. Trench could be eaten sweet or savory and was sometimes served as a pancake. In addition to grains, medieval peasants ate a lot of dairy products. In regions where cows were kept, peasants drank milk and ate cheese, butter, and yogurt. Milk was often boiled to kill bacteria, a process called boiling, and was given to children instead of cow's milk. Goat's milk was sometimes used to make a type of yogurt called milkmaid, which was popular among adults and children alike. Again, the amount of dairy products available to medieval peasants depended on the health of their herds and the season of the year. In regions where goats were kept, peasants drank their milk and ate their cheese, butter, and yogurt. However, in regions where neither cows nor goats were kept, peasants relied on other sources of protein. Meat played a big role in the medieval peasant diet, although which kind of meat depended on where they lived. In regions where pigs were kept, peasants ate pork, including bacon and sausage. Pork was considered a luxury meat and was often reserved for special occasions. In regions where sheep and lambs were kept, medieval peasants ate mutton and lamb. Lamb was often eaten at Easter, while mutton was saved for special occasions. In regions where cattle were kept, medieval peasants ate beef and veal. However, beef was considered a luxury meat and was often reserved for special occasions. In regions where poultry was kept, medieval peasants ate chicken, duck, and geese. Finally, in regions where fish was available, medieval peasants ate herring, salmon, and trout. Medieval peasants got creative about getting their meat though. They weren't above eating roadkill or poaching animals. In fact, hunting wild animals was a popular pastime for medieval peasants. They hunted rabbits, squirrels, foxes, and sometimes deer. They also caught birds like rabbits and squirrels. Medieval peasants prepared and cooked meat in a variety of ways. They roasted it over an open fire, grilled it over charcoal, and boiled it in water. They also stewed it with vegetables and herbs, and spiced it with salt, pepper, and other seasonings. In regions where spices were available, they often mixed their meat with blood, and made black pudding, a type of sausage made with blood, fat, and spices. Finally, we need to talk about sweets. Contrary to popular belief, medieval peasants did eat sweets, but only during special occasions. They made cakes, cookies, and pies with fruit, honey, and nuts. They also enjoyed a variety of fruits, including apples, pears, plums, and cherries. Let's recap what the medieval peasant diet looked like. Grain was the foundation of the medieval peasant diet, and it was eaten as bread. Mary, Queen of Scots, was a teen bride at age 15. She married the future Francis I of France. But what came next stunned the entire continent. What secrets did her new family try to hide from her? And how did they use her to get what they wanted? It's me. And while you may think that arranged marriages are ancient history, there are still over 5,000 arranged marriages every year in the US alone. Imagine you were about to wed a stranger. Now imagine that your wedding night would affect the balance of power in Europe for decades to come. On April 29, 1558, this was the reality for Mary Stuart, the 15-year-old Queen of Scotland. While she would spend much of her childhood in France, her heritage was undeniably Scottish. Her mother, Mary of Guise, was the sister of King James V of Scotland. As such, when her older brother, the recently deceased James, left no surviving children, Mary inherited the Scottish throne. However, as Mary of Guise was still very much alive, it fell to her to rule as regent until Mary, Queen of Scotland, came of age. While Mary, Queen of Scots, would eventually be imprisoned and executed by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England, her path to infamy began with a royal wedding. Mary of Guise had hoped to secure an advantageous marriage for her daughter with a member of the French royal family. As good Catholics, they were eager to cement ties with the French monarchy, as well as secure the Scottish throne against potential English threats. And so, Mary Stuart was sent to live in the French royal court, where she was betrothed to the Dauphin, France's son and heir of King Henry II. While living in France, Mary was placed in the care of her future mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici. Raised in the splendor of the French royal court, Mary excelled in music, poetry, and courtly manners. She was said to have been exceptionally beautiful, with a particular talent for charming those around her. On April 29, 1558, Mary, now 15 years old, was married to Francis in a lavish ceremony at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The wedding was a grand affair, showcasing the close relationship between the French and Scottish crowns. After the ceremony, Mary made her way to the Queen's chamber, where she would spend her wedding night. However, tragedy struck on July 5, 1559. At the age of just 15, Mary of Guise died, making Mary, Queen of Scots, solely responsible for governing her home country. Despite the weight of her dual crowns, Mary was determined to make her own choices regarding her marriage and her role as queen. But what she didn't know was that her new family was hiding secrets from her. Francis's grandfather, King Henry II, had been gravely injured in a jousting accident. While he survived the fall, his health would never fully recover. And soon, King Henry was bedridden, unable to participate in any of the royal duties. This meant that Francis and Catherine de' Medici would have to take on a larger role in the royal court. However, with Henry still alive, this was no easy task. In fact, while Henry was recuperating, he ordered that Francis and Catherine de' Medici remain in Lorraine until he was healthy enough to joust again. However, his health. The medieval village. A look at the past. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking through a medieval village at dusk. The fields are quiet, the air is cool, and smoke curls upward from hearths, where stew pots bubble slowly. At first glance, it might seem like a simple place, built only on survival. Yet beneath the surface, the people who lived here carried a world of beliefs, rituals, and fears, many of which we can glimpse today through archaeology and fragmentary records. What secrets did these villages hold? What did life and death mean in an age of mystery? Join us now as we peel back the layers of history and explore the hidden beliefs that shaped the medieval village. We begin with the familiar, the staple of medieval life, bread. Yet this simple food was more than just sustenance. As agricultural communities, the people of the Middle Ages relied heavily on the rhythms of nature. Seasons dictated life and death, birth and rebirth. And nowhere was this cycle more evident than in the fields of grain. The sowing and reaping of crops were not just tasks but rituals in themselves. Each seed put into the ground was a prayer for the future, a plea for bounty in the face of uncertain weather and unpredictable pests. When the harvest moon turned the fields to gold, the reaping was a celebration. A moment when the fruits of months of labor were brought in and the promise of winter sustenance was secured. But the relationship between humanity and nature in the Middle Ages was not one of certainty. Storms could blight crops, animals could trample carefully tended fields, and the threat of famine always hung in the balance. In times like these, the villagers' thoughts turned to curses, both real and imagined. Sometimes these were directed inwards. Accusations of witchcraft were common during the Middle Ages, often leveled against those whose misfortunes seemed to coincide with their neighbors' ill luck. In a world where the causes of hardship were often obscure, The idea of a malevolent force at work was a terrifying possibility. Then there were the dreaded heresiarchs, those who lived outside the Christian fold. In times of hardship, the fear of outsiders could rise, leading to persecution of Jews and other religious minorities who were sometimes blamed for bringing misfortune upon the community. However, the medieval peasant also had ways of coping and understanding. Religious devotion was a cornerstone of life. Saints were invoked against drought or flood, and churches were adorned with images of divine and demonic forces, reminding villagers that their fates were in hands beyond their own. In the harsh landscape of the Middle Ages, life was a constant struggle against the elements and the uncertainties of nature. In the midst of this struggle, the concept of a curse carried a heavy weight. A curse could bring disease, death, and despair, often blamed for the ills that modern science can now explain. Now, let us turn our attention to another tangible aspect of life: money. Hello, and welcome to this house. Picture again the medieval village we've been visiting in our imagination. The fields stretch outward, dotted with figures bent low in labor, their clothing rough and patched. Smoke rises thinly from cottages where porridge simmers in iron pots. Hunger is constant, work unending. This is the rhythm of peasant life. Now, imagine walking a little further up the slope of a hill, past the wooden palisade, and into the shadow of a castle. Here, the rhythm is different. The stone walls are high, the gates guarded, and inside is a world that feels almost apart from the village below. This is the world of the medieval elite. At the castle hearth, the fire burns brighter. Tapestries hang on the walls, their woven threads telling stories of saints, hunts, and victories. The floors are strewn with rushes, sometimes scented with herbs to mask the odors of smoke and sweat. Where a peasant's table might hold only broth and bread, the Lord's table groans with greater variety. Roasted meats, spiced wine, loaves of fine white wheat bread rather than coarse rye. Imported goods, too, might appear: sugar from distant lands, citrus preserved in honey, almonds carried by traders. Yet even here, abundance is not without its limits. Fresh fruits are seasonal, spices expensive, and preservation still crude. Meat salted heavily could taste harsh, wine often soured. Water, whether in a cottage or a castle, might be unsafe to drink. Ale and weak beer were safer, and so flowed freely, even at noble feasts. Life for the nobility was not only about food, but also about display and duty. To host a banquet was to show power. Long tables were lined with retainers, musicians played softly, and the seating arrangement itself was a hierarchy made visible. At the highest seat, the lord or lady presided, while lesser ranks took their places in order. For peasants outside the hall, the music and laughter drifting into the night might have felt like echoes from another world. Clothing also marked the divide. While peasants wore wool in natural shades, patched and worn, nobles dressed in fabrics, dyed deep blues, reds, or greens. Fur-lined cloaks, silk ribbons, embroidered sleeves. These were more than fashion. They were statements of wealth and authority. Sumptuary laws in some kingdoms even dictated what each class could wear, ensuring the distinction between lord and laborer was never blurred. But nobility came with responsibilities, too. A lord was expected to provide protection to the people who worked his lands. Castles were built not only as residences but as fortresses where villagers could flee during raids or war. Knights, sworn to the service of their lord, trained for combat and defense. While peasants endured famine by chewing on bark or boiling weeds, nobles endured it by managing grain stores, balancing debts, and deciding how much to release and to whom. Religion bound both worlds together, though in different ways. A peasant might kneel in a small wooden church, hoping for divine mercy in a year of poor harvest. A noble might commission a chapel, donate land to a monastery, or sponsor masses sung for the souls of his ancestors. Both sought salvation, but the scale of their offerings was vastly different. Even leisure carried contrasts. Children of peasants played with dolls made of straw and sticks, while the children of nobles were taught to ride, to read a little Latin, and to practice courtly manners. Hunting, hawking, and jousting were pastimes of the elite, not only for pleasure but also for honing military skill. Where a peasant's entertainment was a village dance or a seasonal fair, nobles staged tournaments where knights clashed in armor while crowds cheered. And yet, for all the difference, the worlds were not wholly separate. The grain that filled a lord's storehouse came from the peasant's labor. The meat roasted on his table had been tended by the shepherd in the field. In times of crisis, famine crept even into castles, though softened by reserves and connections, and when wars broke out, as they often did, it was peasants who bore the burden of fighting, carrying pikes or bows while knights in gleaming armor rode beside them. In art, the contrast was preserved. Illuminated manuscripts depicted kings crowned in gold, saints radiant with halos, and peasants stooped with scythes. one world of splendor. When we look back, what we find is not a world of simple darkness or light, but one of contrasts. Hunger and abundance, faith and fear, laughter and loss. The medieval world was a tapestry woven with hardship and hope, violence and beauty, the ordinary and the extraordinary. In the tapestry of the medieval world, every thread, no matter how humble or grand, wove together to make a vibrant whole. The hardships were real, yes, but so was the beauty, the faith, the fear, the laughter, the loss. Just as in the grand tapestries that adorned the walls of medieval halls, light and shadow played together in an intricate dance, so too did the people of this era experience the fullness of life. And as our journey comes to its end, let us remember that just as a tapestry is only truly appreciated when viewed as a whole, so too is the medieval world. It was a time when, amidst the struggles for survival, people found joy in the smallest moments, celebrated life's cycle in festivals, and reached for the heavens in magnificent cathedrals. They danced at royal courts, toiled in the fields, and huddled around crackling hearths, sharing stories and songs. It was a time when the boundaries between the ordinary and the extraordinary were blurred. A peasant girl could become a queen, a lowly donkey could carry a king, and a miller's son could slay a dragon. Magic and mayhem were part of everyday life. In this world where the mundane and the marvelous intertwined, death was ever present, yet so was hope. The Black Death might have ravaged villages, but communities rebuilt. Famines might have struck, but people shared their meager stores. Wars might have raged, but truces were called. Even in the face of adversity, life went on. Children were born, crops were sown, and prayers were offered. Love stories unfolded, friendships deepened, and acts of kindness touched hearts. And then there was mystery. From the mystical aura of Stonehenge to the macabre fascination with human anatomy, the medieval world was full of unanswered questions and forbidden knowledge. Alchemy, astrology, and the occult held sway, and the natural world was brimming with unseen forces. The very air was thick with magic, and the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms were as thin as God. When we think about the medieval world today, it's easy to get caught up in the grand narratives of kings and queens, battles and bards. But let us not forget the tapestry was made, not just of these grand threads, but of countless smaller ones, each as important as the last. The laughter of children playing, the murmur of lovers at dusk, the clink of tankards in a tavern, the rustle of a monk reading late into the night. These were the sounds that filled the medieval world, and they wove together a symphony of existence. So, as we bring our journey to a close, let us savor the symphony of the medieval world, the full richness of its tapestry. Let us remember that it was a world much like our own, filled with the full range of human experiences, both beautiful and brutal, joyous and sorrowful. For it was in this very complexity that the people of the Middle Ages found meaning, hope, and love in a world that often seemed indifferent to their struggles. And perhaps that is the most enduring lesson we can take away from our travels through time. A world of contradictions. The medieval world was a place of paradoxes, where darkness and light, faith and doubt, piety and sin, all coexisted. It was a world where peasants worked the land under a king's decree while claiming it for God, where knights fought in the name of chivalry, yet plundered for gold, where popes preached humility, yet wielded immense temporal power, where faith was the cornerstone of daily life, yet heresy simmered beneath the surface, where magnificent cathedrals soared towards heaven, yet inside lay the bones of countless souls, where plague and famine stalked the land, yet people celebrated life with festivals and feasts, where the wheel of fortune turned unpredictably, bringing both unexpected joy and crushing despair. And yet it was precisely this complexity that gave the medieval world its unique character. It was a world where, even in the darkest hour, a sliver of hope could shine through, where even in the midst of war, acts of kindness and compassion could flourish, where even in the face of death, the spirit of humanity could endure. It was a world where contradictions were not seen as conflicting, but as complementary, where darkness and light, faith and doubt, could coexist in harmony. The people of the medieval world navigated these contradictions with a remarkable resilience. They prayed for salvation while living life to the fullest. They toiled under harsh conditions while dreaming of better days. They clung to tradition while adapting to change. They celebrated the sacred while embracing the mundane. It was a delicate balancing act, but one that allowed them to find meaning and beauty in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. In the end, it was this ability to embrace the full spectrum of human existence that made the medieval world so rich and complex, and ultimately so enduringly fascinating. A world of everyday miracles. Alongside the grandeur, the gloom, and the grit, the medieval world teemed with everyday miracles. Miracles of nature, of human spirit, and of faith. The common folk saw miracles in the changing seasons, in the birth of animals, in the blooming of flowers, and in the healing power of herbs. They witnessed miracles in acts of kindness, in moments of courage, and in the simple joys of daily life. To the medieval peasants, a good harvest was a miracle, a bountiful meadow, a blessing. The churning rhythms of nature were not just part of their environment, they were expressions of divine providence. Miracles also resided in the everyday interactions among people, a helping hand to a neighbor, a moment of generosity, a word of comfort. All were seen as acts of God's grace. The world was full of omens and signs, portents and prophecies. A broken egg foretold misfortune, a red sky at sunset, fair weather. Each event was scrutinized for messages from the divine. Healing was a miracle, a cure from a mysterious ailment, a sudden recovery from a serious illness. It was attributed to divine intervention or the power of holy relics. Saints and their shrines were believed to be channels of God's grace, offering solace and healing to the faithful. Religious festivals and rituals were occasions of collective miracle. From Easter to Pentecost, from Christmas to Candlemas, each celebration was a reminder of God's love and presence among His people. Miracles of the supernatural kind were also believed to occur. Cures by relics, apparitions, and the unexplained became part of local lore, passed down through generations. People sought out these miraculous occurrences, not just for their wonder, but for the hope and comfort they offered. For the people of the Middle Ages, the world was not merely a place they inhabited. It was a living, breathing entity filled with wonders and mysteries. They saw miracles in the grand sweep of nature's cycles, in the kindness of their neighbors, in the healing power of faith. For them, life was a tapestry woven with both challenges and blessings, and they embraced it all with a deep sense of wonder and gratitude. So, as you rest now, you may imagine the last candle of our story burning low. Outside, the medieval village sleeps. The fields are quiet, the castle walls still. The peasants dream of full harvests, the nobles of safe kingdoms, the monks of eternal light. All of them, kings, peasants, saints, and sinners, share the same silence of the night, the same longing for peace, the same small hope that tomorrow will dawn gently. Let that thought cradle you now. For though centuries divide us from their world, their fears, their joys, their need for rest were not so different from our own. Sleep well.